All right, I think we are live. Okay, we're live. Hey everyone, happy Sunday. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining me in this session. Um, so we're here for our live sacred space session for the month of August. And I want to say that, as always, I am honored to be with you here in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty. And I look forward to sharing time with you here in our shared sacred space together today. So as always, the things we'll do in our sacred space together today is, first I'll go ahead and go through the process of setting sacred space. And then we'll have our talk on an overall topic. And the topic this month will be how to break through stalemate in life. How to break through stalemate in life, and basically how to get unstuck when you are just between a rock and a hard place. So we'll have that conversation. Gary has selected the fairy tale for this month that has led us into this topic. We'll do a bit of an exercise after that, and then we'll close sacred space for this session. So I'll go ahead and start and the process of setting sacred space by saying that what we intend to do here, what we would like to do here together, is to create a space which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, in order for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves, however we define that. It could be our intuition, or a muse, or just hunches that come to us, brilliant flashes of insight, right? But in order to do that, we need to be in a certain state of mind, state of being. And so we would like to create this safe sanctuary space here so that we are all able to relax and surrender with no feeling of danger or threat, so that we can partake of the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. In an opening sacred space today, I will propose, as I do every session, that we all follow the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. Number 1, which is confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules: what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now that's the rule when we are together in person, when we're not in the middle of a pandemic. While we're here online, the stream is public, the chat is public, the replay will be public. So the way we handle confidentiality in an online setting is via anonymization. So if you would like to be anonymous, you don't have to be anonymous. But if you would like to be anonymous, the way to do that would be to come into the Crowdcast stream. After you register, go into the edit profile feature, and then just change your username to Harry Potter, Mickey Mouse, whatever you like. And then come back and continue to chat, ask questions under that username. The second principle is that we would like, as much as possible, to refrain from giving each other, or even ourselves ideally, any sense of threat, controlling, shaming, but even well-intentioned. So there's no fixing, no interventions, no tough love. And the reason for that is that while there may be nothing wrong with saying, like, well, you really need to do this to, like, get your life together, and this will hurt me more than it hurts you. While there may be nothing wrong intrinsically with that approach, we're here in sacred space in order to be in sacred space. And so that means that in order to stay in sacred space, we need to leave sort of the realm of any kind of control, threat, fear sort of driven behavior, even if it's well-intentioned. Even if it's well-intentioned. Now, after we're done with sacred space in an hour or two, we can go back out into, like, the regular profane world. And we can continue wagging our fingers at each other to read this book, try this program, do whatever. But we don't do that here, because there are certain things you can only do in sacred space. So in the space of 2 hours, we'd like to maintain that space so we can get our things done that we need sacred space for. So here we are holding space for each other to be however we are, right? To be afraid, to be anxious, to be happy, to be relaxed. And then one level up from that, to be okay with however we feel about however we feel. So if we're afraid and anxious and we feel like, well, of course, I mean, I'm absolutely, justified in being afraid and anxious. Look at the world around us. We hold space for that. If you're afraid and anxious and you're like, well, but I'm such, an incompetent, I'm weak, and I shouldn't be afraid and anxious. We hold space for that. If you're happy and relaxed and okay with that, we hold space for that. And if you're happy and relaxed and feeling awfully guilty, I'm too privileged and I shouldn't be feeling happy and relaxed, we hold space for that. Right? That's just to give you a flavor of the nature of the space that we're trying to create here. So that's the second principle. And the third principle is a kind of corollary to the first two, which is no commerce. So because we're in sacred space here together today, nothing may be sold. I can't sell you anything. Gary can't sell you anything. My editor, who will be on screen in a moment, please refrain from selling things to each other in the chat. But also that extends to recommendations as well. So if I recommend a book or a program or something, even if it's not my own program, even if it's just something I've tried that I really liked, even that we try our best to refrain from that. Oh, you should try this speaker. You should try this approach or this methodology. Not because recommendations are bad, but because, again, if you express an issue that you're having and I say, well, try this, however well-intentioned that is, right? There's still a kind of veiled threat where you're like, oh gosh, I better do what Artie suggested, or else, I may lose out. I may miss out. I may continue to feel the pain for longer than I otherwise would have. And again, while there may be nothing wrong with that, in the sacred space, we try as much as possible to refrain from that, to maintain the power of the sacred space. Said another way, we are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide, not for your value add. We're here for you. We're here for you and your essence. And the fourth principle, which is a corollary to the first three, is no expectation of participation. Right? So because it's sacred space, no fear, threat, and control, there's no pressure to do anything. Right? You can stay, you cannot stay, you can chat, you cannot chat, you can ask questions. You can blast out the link and invite all your friends to come join you, or you can keep it all to yourself, right? So there's no pressure to do anything, come and go as you please, because again, the nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention, right? From what you are and not from what you do or provide. There was a person who attended one of my retreats probably like 2.5 years ago now. And through the whole retreat, he didn't say a single word. He was just kind of like soaking it in. And, we would check in with him privately every now and then. He didn't say anything. He didn't do anything. I mean, you could tell the wheels were turning, right? And afterwards, I checked in with him. I was like, dude, was that okay? I'm worried. And he said, that was one of the best experiences of my life. And I was like, I'm so relieved because I was worried he wasn't like really participating. And what he said to me was, the way you describe sacred space, I took you up on that offer and I didn't do anything I didn't want to do. And I've got to tell you, that was the first time in my life I've ever gone for, 3 minutes, let alone 3 days, where I felt safe to just do nothing. And I knew that I would not be messed with or interfered with or finger wagged at. And just that experience alone was like, I don't know, it's just kind of a life experience. I think it's changed me somehow, but I don't even know how. And I'm like, you don't even have to express it. And he was like, thank you. So that's the kind of feeling we are trying to go for in this online venue, in this public venue. We're in our, 64th session now. It was weekly for a little over a year, and now we've gone to monthly. And I think it's gone all right. So that's what we're trying to do. And all of us here together will tend to amplify that effect. So this is what I propose. And so if you are not okay with entering into that sacred space together with all of us, that's totally okay, right? There's no pressure or fear, threat, or control for you to come to sacred space, to stay in sacred space. But that is where we're all going in the next 30 to 60 seconds. So if you're not okay with that, we're just going to pause and give everyone a moment to withdraw from the group as they would like. And that's totally okay. We'll still be friends. We'll still catch up with you later in profane space. If you're on my email list, I'm still going to send you emails. And we'll still hang out still. No worries at all. So we'll pause here for just a moment to let everyone make your selection and dial that in. Okay. And so then for the rest of us, we will now go ahead and move forward together into our shared sacred space. And as we cross the threshold now together into our shared sacred space, I will just remind everyone, including myself, that we would like, as much as possible, to observe the 4 principles of sacred space: confidentiality / anonymity, no fear, threat, or control, no interventions, no tough love, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. All right, welcome to our shared sacred space. Okay, so let's have our topic for the month. So our session topic that emerged, that came out of our mythical brainstorm that we do before every session here, was how to break through stalemate in life. This month's mythical brainstorm between myself and my editor, Gary, brought us to reflect on the pattern of stalemate in our lives. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And what does it feel like when we're struggling to break through? And what is the trick, right? What is the crux of how to actually get past it? Okay. So to guide us into this, we will read a fairy tale from the European tradition, and then let the golden thread sort of guide us from there. So Gary, if you're there, would you like to come on screen and share the story with us? Hi, Gary.
Hi.
How are you? Happy Sunday. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's so good to be back.
All right.
Yeah.
So would you like to tell us about the story you've selected?
Yeah. So I picked the story, pretty much when I saw the title, I was like, oh yeah, I think we got to do this one because, the title is The Dragon and His Grandmother. And it's from the Andrew Lang collection. That collection is just so rich in fairy tales from across the world, and such obscure stories that you haven't really heard of. They're not in the regular Grimm's Brothers collection, or they're not in typically the fairy tales you've heard growing up. Right. So I was looking at this, and that's intriguing, and I looked at it. I just love the story. It's a short story, but then it's you can see the common motifs that we've been talking about, throughout the sacred space sessions.
Totally.
But also it's very unique and it has a very different flavor. So I thought, yeah, we should try this out.
I love that. I got so excited when you shared even the title with me when we did our brainstorm call a couple of weeks ago. I was like, wow, you think the dragon's scary? What is the dragon scared of? His grandmother.
Yeah. So it's such a fun story.
Do you want to tell us? Right. Would you tell us the story?
Yeah. So like I said, the story is called Dragon and His Grandmother, right? And this is a kind of it has all the flavor of a regular fairy tale from the European folk tradition. So the story goes, there was once a great war, and the king had a huge army, a great many soldiers in the army. But he gave them so little pay that they couldn't live on it. And then 3 of these soldiers, sort of talked to each other, and then decided that they should desert. They can't stay in the army with so little pay, so they will leave. So one of them said, oh, if we are caught after we run away, we'll be hanged to death, right? So we should really plan this carefully. How are we going to do this? And the other one said, oh, there is this large cornfield just outside the army camp. If we were to hide ourselves in that field, then no one could find us, and the army will have to march on eventually. I think tomorrow's the marching day. So they'll march away and they'll never know. And then we can come out, right? So they planned this up. And they crept into the cornfield at night. But to their luck, the army did not march on, and it remained encamped right there. And so it was that they sat there for like 2 days and 2 nights, and they were so hungry and tired that they nearly died. But, the risk was that if they even ventured out of the cornfield, they would definitely die. So they were sitting in this situation where they would die in the field and they would die outside the field. And they said, what was the point of deserting the army? I mean, we will die here miserably. And as they were saying that, as they spoke, a fiery dragon came flying through the air, and it hovered over them, right? And asked them directly why they were hidden there. And so they said, well, we're 3 soldiers, we deserted the army because our pay was so small. And now, if we stay here, we die of hunger. And if we move out, we'll be hanged to death. So that's where we're at, right? And so the dragon said, okay, now if you will serve me for 7 years, right, I will lead you right through the army and no one will catch you, right? So the soldier said, well, we've no choice, so we have to take your offer. So the dragon then seized them at its claws, took them over the air, right over the army, and then set them down on the ground a long way away. And then the dragon said to them, he gave them a little whip and said, well, you can whip and slash with this, and as much money as you want will jump up for you. You can live however you like, as great lords, keep horses, drive about in carriages. But after 7 years, I'll come for you and you're mine. So he did this very, he had thought this through. So he put a book before them and he said, you're to sign here and I'll come back with your signatures, right? But there is also a catch. When I'm back, I will give you a riddle, and if you guess it, you'll be free and out of my power. So the dragon said its piece, and then it flew away. And these 3 soldiers continued on with their little whip. And all the while, they had as much money as they wanted. They wore grand clothes. They made their way into the world. And wherever they went, they lived in splendor, they made merry, they drove about in carriages, they ate and drank. And, nothing they did could be wrong. And when this happens, time passes very quickly. So they didn't even realize when the 7 years were almost over. But as they came close, they started to get anxious. The 2 of the soldiers were really frightened. And they were worried and wondering, how are we going to deal with this? How are we going to escape it? We're doomed. And the 3rd soldier was still quite carefree, and he kind of dismissed it and said, oh, well, we'll see. Don't have to worry. We still have the key, right? We can guess the riddle. So we still have a chance. But the other 2 just weren't convinced. Like, yeah, the dragon's not going to let us go that easy. I mean, how are we going to guess the riddle? We don't even know what it is. And so they were sitting in a field and they were kind of pulling long faces, worried about it. And this 3rd soldier was like, I wasn't born yesterday. We'll figure out. It can't be that hard to guess the riddle. And so as they were, going through this, an old woman passed by, and she asked them why they all looked so worried. And the first two soldiers said, "Oh, what's the point of telling you? You can't help us. We're all doomed." And the woman said, "Well, who knows? If you confide your trouble in me, maybe I can help." So they told her, how they had become the servants of the dragon for 7 years, and they had so much money, and they had signed their names now. It was all done. It was a contract. Now 7 years had passed, and they were done. The dragon was coming for them, unless, of course, they could guess a riddle. So the old woman said, "Okay, if you'd help yourselves, one of you must go into the woods, and there will be a tumble down kind of rock cave, which looks like a little house. And you must go in, and there you will find help." And when the old woman said that, the two soldiers were still kind of, "That's not going to help us in any way. What's that supposed to be?" Right? And they just sat where they were. But the third soldier, he jumped up. He was all, energetic about it too. He had good feelings about this. So he straight away went into the woods, and he looked and looked until he found this rock hut. And in the hut was a very old woman. She looked really old. And this was the dragon's grandmother. Right? And she asked him who he was and why he came here. What is his business? And he gave her the entire story. He told her everything that happened. And, this is what was going to happen now, and he needs help. And the grandmother looked at him, and she was quite pleased with him. So she took compassion on him and said, "Okay, all right, let me help you." She lifted up this large stone, which was over the cellar, and said, "Hide yourself in there, and you can hear everything that is spoken in this room. All you have to do is sit still, don't move, and when the dragon comes, I'll ask him for what the riddle is going to ask. And he tells me everything, right? So you listen carefully, and you'll get the answer." So that was the plan. So at midnight, the dragon flew in, and he asked for his dinner, right? He was hungry. And the grandmother laid the table. She brought out all the food and drink. He ate and drank, and, they were chit-chatting all the while. And then in the course of the conversation, the grandmother asked what he had done in the day and what he was looking forward to, and how many souls he had conquered. That's a dragon thing. And he said, "Well, I haven't had much luck today, but I have 3 soldiers coming up tomorrow, so I'm quite looking forward to it." And she said, "3 soldiers? How did you ever manage that?" And I said, "Oh, they're mine. I signed a contract with them, and, I've told them that I'll give them one riddle, and they'll never be able to guess. So, it's all a done deal." So she asked, "What sort of riddle is this?" And the dragon said, "Well, I will tell you this. In the North Sea, there is a dead sea cat, and that will be their roast meat. And there's a rib of a whale, and that will be their silver spoon. And the hollow foot of a dead horse, and that will be their wine glass." So after this conversation, the dragon went off to bed, and the grandmother pulled up the stone and let out the soldier. And she asked him, did you pay attention? Did you get everything he said? And he said, yes, I know enough now, and I can help myself wonderfully. Thank you so much for your help." And then he went off through the window secretly and ran back to his friends. And he told them how the dragon had been outwitted by his own grandmother, and how he had heard from his own lips the answer to the riddle. right? And they were all happy and delighted and high spirits. They took out their whip, they whipped it and cracked it and got so much money. And, you know, they were like, oh, you know, we still have a long life ahead. It's not the end. And finally, the dragon came with this book. And he pointed out at the signatures and said, well, I'm taking you underground with me, and you shall have a meal there. If you can tell me what you will get for your roast meat, you'll be free and you can keep the whip. So the first soldier said, well, in the North Sea lies a dead sea cat. That will be our roast meat. And the dragon was annoyed. He was like, how do they know? And he looked about for a second and said, okay, then what shall be your spoon? And the second soldier said, the rib of a whale shall be our silver spoon. And the dragon was irritated now, so he started growling. He said, all right, do you know what your wine glass will be? And the third soldier said, oh, it's an old horse's roof. That will be our wine glass. And at that moment, the dragon just gave a loud shriek and he flew away, and he had no more power over them. And the three soldiers took the little whip, whipped as much money as they wanted, and they lived happily ever after. So that's the story. Artie, do you want to come back on?
Hi, thank you. That was wonderful. I loved even more the second time. Thank you. So let me ask the question I always ask, which is, so where do you enter into that story?
So, like I said, you know, we've done these kind of stories before with similar flavor and similar kind of characters, right? There's this motif that keeps coming up, which is of the dragon or the devil. You know, they're called different things in different stories, but they come to a soldier and say, oh, you know, I'll give you what you want, but 7 years, either you kind of come with me for 7 years and be my, you know, sort of slave. That's the understanding. Or as in this story, you know, I will come to you after 7 years, after you've enjoyed all my rewards, right? So there is that kind of theme that keeps coming up, which is very intriguing. And what I was really curious about is that in the story we've done before, the story of Neverwash, right? The soldier does go with the devil and completes the 7 years, right?
Right.
Here, the slight difference in the story is they outwit the dragon. They don't go.
Right.
So it's not like, oh, you know, you gave us this, you saved our lives, you gave us so much money. So, all right, you know, we'll come with you and do what you ask us to do. There is this additional kind of a layer, which is a very different flavor from these stories where they outwit the dragon. And even more intriguing thing is that the dragon's grandmother is their accomplice. You know, so it's fascinating how that is, because you'd expect the grandmother to be this kind of Baba Yaga character, right? Who will probably eat you up even before you speak. Like, you go to her, knock on her hut, and she's like, why are you here? And just eat you up right there, right? But she actually helps them out. And that's just so fascinating to me. I mean, this you know, wise woman, grandmother kind of characters, every time they come, they're so unpredictable, but also...
Well, they should be even more terrifying than the dragon.
Yeah, I mean, they should be, and they are in some ways, but it's just that they're also so lovely. You know, I remember the Goose Girl story where the grandmother kind of, you know, has this goose girl who is actually a princess, if you go back to the story. I mean, she is giving this princess shelter and protection, but not in a way that you would normally think, where she's nurturing her, protecting her, nourishing her. But the goose girl is a captive, and the goose girl is like a maid, and she takes care of the geese and cleans the house, and all of that. So it's not really like ideal kind of way. It's still scary to be with her, but then amazingly, she is her protectress, right? So there's always that kind of a mixed flavor to the grandmother, which I absolutely love. So that was my initial reaction to the story. It's like, what is this? This is so different from all of the stories, but it has such.
Oh, I think I lost you. Oh, are you there? Hello?
Yeah, sorry, I think my screen froze over for a while. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Can you say that last part again?
Yeah. So what was fascinating for me is that there are these common themes and common motifs, and yet the flavor is so very different and unique to the story. Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like the physics are still internally consistent, right? I mean, the motifs of the soldier and the 7 years term of a contract with this chthonic kind of scary part of you. So let me step back and say, for those folks who may be new, or this may be the first session that you've actually sort of stepped into. So when we read these dreams and fairy tales and myths in our healing work, when we do our healing work, the lens we use to read these stories is what we call a mythopoetic lens. And basically, that's just a fancy word for saying, when we read a story, when we read a dream, while we're at it, like when we read sort of outside situations, scenarios in the real world, right, in our lives, in our relationships, in the workplace, etc. We read them mythopoetically, which means that we regard every major actor in the story as being a symbol of a different part of our own inner selves. Okay, so in this story, the soldiers are a symbol of a part of you. The cornfield is a symbol of a part of you. The army is a symbol of a part of you. The dragon is definitely a symbol of a part of you. And the dragon's grandmother is also a symbol of a part of you. And they are all parts of you, but they are different. Just like my eyes are a part of me, my heart, my lungs, my liver are all parts of me, but they're not the same, right? And ideally, on a good day, they're all working together in concert to help me thrive and pursue my bliss and meaning and purpose in life. But that's not always the case. Sometimes they're in conflict. And so, so with what Gary was saying, what I love about that is that the usual pattern we see or have seen in the stories, and I think Gary can put up the links to the Never Wash story and the Goose Girl story from the replay set, is that you're going along, you kind of lost your way. You're this, usually it's like a soldier that has been discharged from the army. So you're off track now, right? Before you had structure, before you had a unified chain of command, you didn't have to think about what you would do. You would be given commands in the sense of, in life, if I sign up to follow a template in life, right? The sort of the good girl, the strong man, sort of the family person, or even in a career, the banker, the baker, the doctor, right? There's a track laid out for you, and you don't really have to think. You have to fight hard, right? You do take on risk, right? The life of a soldier is risky, but there's no real question, right? There's the comfort of the structure of what you need to do. There's a ladder you need to fight up, and you can get good at fighting. It's just a question of practice and a little bit of talent, and you'll get there. And so in these fairy tales, the symbol of being in an army is typically a symbol of like being on that track. And the usual, like in The Devil's Sooty Brother, which is, I think, right in the middle of the Grimm's tales. I think it's Grimm number 100. And then the never wash tale. There's a soldier. They've been discharged, so laid off. Your relationship ended, and you're like, I'm adrift. I don't know what my purpose in life is anymore. Am I still a husband? Am I still a father? Am I still a banker? Am I still a tech person? Right? So you're kind of adrift. And then this figure from deep within you comes up and says, now I want you to go down into the underworld, the underground with me, and serve a term of 7 years. And generally that is a symbol of going down. So going down in a dream and a fairy tale is a symbol of going into the darker, sort of scary parts of your own inner self. And what you typically do down there is you go into grief. You go into grief. In the Devil's Sooty Brother, you literally go into the underground cavern with, quote unquote, the devil, who ends up being a very nurturing, very caring, initially scary, but ends up being a very nurturing figure within you, right? And what you're doing there for 7 years is you're boiling these kettle pots, right? And if you remember from the very first session of this entire series back in, I think, March of 2020, we talked about the transformative sort of power and even vector of tough situations, where in order to have transformation, you needed two key elements, which is containment and pressure, right? So a cooking pot, a witch's cauldron, a womb from which we are born, the caterpillar going down into the cooking pot of the cocoon and then coming out transformed as the butterfly. The two elements you need for this cooking pot are containment, so you can't escape, and pressure, a little bit of fire, low heat to kind of get things cooking. Now it's painful in there, right? In the Devil's Sooty Brother, you're literally sitting there, sort of tending the fires of these cooking pots for 7 years. And 7, of course, is a symbol of perfection, the completion of a cycle, and generally ripeness, right? Ripeness. Even in the Abrahamic sort of system in Genesis, right? In the Old Testament, God, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, completes creation in 7 days. It is complete, it is ripe, and in the ripeness of the seventh day, he rests. And so, so when we look at this, it's very interesting. It's very intriguing because the elements are all there, right? The devil, this dragon, shows up out of nowhere. These soldiers are not discharged. They're actually deserting. They're like, screw this. We can't handle this anymore. We're not getting enough money, literally ego power. We can't feed ourselves. We can't nourish ourselves. We're on a track, the army, where we're not getting enough ego power, which is money. Money is a symbol of ego power. And we're not getting enough food and nourishment. And food and nourishment in a dream / myth is a symbol of, it is a symbol of nourishment, but not necessarily physical nourishment, but spiritual nourishment, emotional nourishment. Right? So for instance, if you're in a relationship that isn't working for you, you're on the track, you're supposed to be the good girl, you're supposed to be the good sort of family person or whatever, and you are starved for ego power, you can't stand up for yourself, no one listens to you, and you're starved for emotional nourishment and spiritual nourishment. And so you feel like you need to get out, right? You feel like you need to get out. And what's interesting about this version is that the devil sort of dragon part of you comes up, makes you an offer, but doesn't bring you down immediately. After 7 years of ripeness and partying and having, living up, then you go down. And we know from the other stories, going down is terrifying. You resist it. But once you're down there in grief, right, it all works out just fine. I mean, it's painful as heck. It's incredibly terrifying. But going down into grief is, basically the most powerful transformative and healing thing you can do. Right? It's the fear and resistance of grief that is what screws everything up, right? It's like they say of crime, sort of policing and crime and punishment, right? And the old saying is the cover up is worse than the crime. If you ran a red light right? You can just pay the ticket and get on with it. If you try to cover it up, lie, try to bribe the officer, speed off, and you get chased, the cover up is like 100 times worse than the crime. Just like say, sorry, officer, pay your ticket and like get on with it. Right? So it's just, you can, if you've had a loss, just grieve it. Just grieve it. And when we talk a lot about grief and grief processes when we do our healing work. And one of the things I say, I won't get very much deep into this, is there's a difference metaphorically between grief and depression. Right? And this is not a medical terminology. This is just a metaphorical kind of way of thinking about it, which is grief is you have a loss, you feel the pain, you don't run away from the pain, and you go down and you sit with the pain. It's terrifying. It's the dragon. It's terrifying. And you say, no, I don't even need the 7 years with the fancy whip. Let's just go down now. I know who you are. I know what you're here for. I don't need to sign any name in my book. I'll come with you. Let's go. And the dragon will be like, wait till grandma hears about this. Like, we never see this. This is incredible. So you go down and you go all the way through and you come out the other end, right? For better or worse, come what may, you're just like, I'm going to sit with this loss and let the chips fall where they may. And that is the transformation. That is the agent of transformation. Depression, on the other hand, is when you say, oh my gosh, no, dragon, get away, run away, and you numb, you distract yourself, you go into denial, you take all kinds of like programs and pills and everything you can grab at to avoid going down. And after all that, a hand comes up, grabs you, and takes you down anyway. You end up in the same place. It just takes a lot longer and has probably cost you more. But, we are all humans. This is the pattern. Right? We're not saying this is bad, you shouldn't do it like this. We're saying we're not giving a prescription. We're simply describing a state of affairs that is so. When I have a loss, I avoid grief. I'm terrified of grief, and I run away, and I do everything that I just said leads to, say, depression versus grief in that metaphor. But there is something about reading a fairy tale which then lays this out in a pattern for you to see ahead of time. Oh, if I do that, if I do what these soldiers do, I'm not an idiot. This is a thing. This is a thing, and here is one example of how it sort of unfolds, blossoms, and plays out. So what is this version then? What is this version? So I enter into the story in a couple different places. The first is the fact that these are soldiers, right? So they're on this track, they are unsatisfied, and they scheme to leave, right? So the army, as we said, is a symbol of a track, a templated track in life. You give yourself over. As a soldier, you give over your sovereignty, even the sovereignty of your life and death. Right? If your sergeant says storm the hill, you storm the hill, fully knowing it's a suicide mission and you're going to die, and you do it anyway. That's how much you surrender your sovereignty for the track, right? And what do you get in exchange? You get, typically, right? As a modern soldier in sort of our liberal democracies, you get a salary, you get sort of opportunities in life, but you get honor. Right. In ancient times, as like, say, a Roman soldier, you got a real chance at like money, loot, prestige, and all the rest of us. But you're taking this gamble, right? In regular life, when we take on a certain job path or whatever, we're like betting that if I give myself over to this path of, say, high tech or banking or becoming a physician, I will get something in return that I want. But it doesn't always work out like that, right? In the Devil's Sooty Brother, they got discharged with no loot. In this, right, the deal is not working out. They're in the army. They don't even have like full pay, full meals, and they're like, we need to get out of this. Okay. So they decide to get out and run into the cornfield. Okay. And in the cornfield, right? They enter into a state of stalemate. Okay, they enter into a state of stalemate. And this is this beautiful aspect of the story where it just lays it out so perfectly. So you're on this track, you're not getting what you signed up for. Okay, you thought the sort of a certain track of being the good girl and having, the spouse and the white picket fence and everything, and 2.5 kids and 2 cars in the driveway would be the answer. And it was advertised as such, just be a good girl, do this track, and everything will be fine. Well, you did it. And then you exceeded all expectation, right? You have the full career and the family and the everything. And yet you feel empty inside, right? As it's described in many different mythic traditions. But let's just say the Fisher King, right? The Arthurian, Holy Grail, Celtic sort of mythic tradition. And the story of Parzival. And the version I use often is the Wolfram von Eschenbach version, right? Written in the early 1200s, or written around 1205. And in that version, there are 2 key phrases that always just are like a gut punch when you hear them. And basically, without getting into the full story, this Grail King who has this wound of basically being on the wrong track is described as being at the feast, and the Grail gives you whatever your heart desires, everything you want. But because of this wound of being off on the wrong track, when he puts the food in his mouth, anything he desires, in his mouth, the food turns to ash, which is, by the way, a symbol of grief. Okay, so sitting at the feast, and yet all the food turns to ash in your mouth. And from that same mythic tradition, another way the text describes the anguish of this wounded king is that he is described as being in a state in midlife, right? In midlife, of being too ill to live and yet unable to die. Too ill to live and yet unable to die. So that is stalemate. That is stalemate. And often the trigger for what we in modern society call midlife crisis. In traditional societies, they knew you would hit this point because it's like there are certain things we want you to do as a young person, and we tell you to do them, we expect you to do them. And then you'll hit a point where you hit what we call crisis, but in traditional societies, they called it midlife initiation, your second birth, where you've done the things we've asked you to do. Now we take you through another transformation, still pressure and containment, still terrifying. And you get to do this next phase of your life. We don't have that. So we don't have a concept of midlife initiation. We don't have any of the support for it. But we're still human beings, right? We still share the same biological mythopoetic chassis of humans in traditional societies. So we hit that phase of life as well. And we go haywire. It looks like we go haywire because the track says continue going until you die, right? And we start veering off the track. And because we don't have a sense for expecting it, we call it midlife crisis. And it's like just a shock that everyone goes through this midlife crisis. And if they don't, they just remain kind of under pressure and containment, too ill to live and yet unable to die. Right? So the beauty of this story then is they make a break for it. They run into the cornfield. But then in the cornfield, they are stuck. The army doesn't leave. The army is waiting, trying to smoke them out, right? Which is fascinating because they're if we stay here, we're going to starve, which is very interesting because they're in a cornfield. They can eat the corn. And yet it doesn't occur to them that we can just eat the corn. They remain in this state of stalemate. And the way I read that is that if they don't realize it, it's like being at the feast and ash, the food turning into ash. But if you say they know it and they choose not to eat it, then you could read that almost as being we know we're in stalemate. There are these little pleasures and distractions we could use to distract ourselves with, numbing, drinking, partying, whatever, right? But you're in the state of stalemate where it's like, I'm not going to eat any of this corn or whatever. It's like, I'm either out of the army or I'm not taking a second prize, right? I did this, ran into the cornfield to get out of the army. I'm not leaving until I get what I came here for, which is to get out, right? And on to the next thing. So they are stuck. What are examples? I mean, I think I've described this enough in mythopoetic terms so that we all have this feeling of it. But as an example, let's say you're a young person and you're like, I think I'm a painter. And your family is like, well, how are you going to make money doing that? Who's going to want to marry you if you're just some like starving artist or whatever? Your dad was a physician, your mom was a physician, your grandparents are all doctors and scientists. Why don't you go in? We'll get you into this great medical school. And one thing leads to another. You're like, all right, fine, right? So you get in, you become this famous physician. You're like running a hospital. It's very prestigious, right? All these people, their jobs, careers rely on you. But deep down inside, you're actually a painter. Right? But the other side of you says, well, I mean, be that as it may, why don't you just paint on the side as a hobby or whatever? You can't possibly leave everything in your career and become a painter, run off and join the circus, right? So, but at the same time, this painter side of you says, hobby is not enough. We are a painter, right? I don't care if we're Picasso or not. We're not trying to do painting for money and prestige. We have plenty of money and prestige on the physician side, right? And it's fine that you did that. I like the big house. I like all the other things. But at the same time, are we really going to like live out the rest of our lives without being a full-powered painter? That is not acceptable. And until we talk about this is you and your inner dragon or inner something, right? You will not sleep, right? You will continue getting that ulcer, right? You will continue being depressed, and you need to hide it from everyone because what is the shame? I mean, how shameful is it? You're this famous physician and you have ulcers and you're depressed yourself, right? But we're at stalemate. There's this irresistible force of like who you really are inside coming up and impacting against this immovable object of like, well, we've been doing this for 30 years. We're not going to throw it all away now. So I stand strong, I'm immovable. And yet the force that is within you that has been held back and will not be held back anymore comes for it. It is irresistible against the immovable, the impact, and there's not even an explosion. It's just, metal on metal and it's stalemate. And people go through this all the time, right? They know their bliss all along is in this direction, but they keep going in this direction. And then after a while, it's very hard to make the sharp left turn to go back because of what it will do to their lives, the guilt and fear of what will happen. And the thing is, like, if you're saying, oh my gosh, that's me, it's like, yeah, congratulations, you're normal. We all do this, right? The point of a fairy tale is not to say now, listen, this is what could happen. You better avoid it by doing this, this, and this, right? That's to read the fairy tale as an allegory, fear, threat, and control, right? The moral of the story is don't be a bad person. That's not how we read it. We don't read it allegorically. We read it mythopoetically, which is to say, this is a pattern of how it does happen, right? It's like showing you the life cycle of a butterfly. It's a caterpillar, a cocoon, and then a butterfly, right? It's not a moralizing story saying, now be careful now. Don't be like the caterpillar and eat so much that you become the cocoon and then the butterfly. It's just like, this is the life cycle. If you're a caterpillar, this will happen to you, right? And by showing you the full cycle, you can kind of get wise to the pattern. And when you go down, you don't think you're an idiot. You're just like, okay, this is part of the pattern. It's fine. I'm actually fine. Okay. So what does this pattern tell us here? So what's interesting to me, especially here in sacred space, where we talk about holding space, where we talk about not judging, where we talk about like however you are, we just hold space for it. And we do this for ourselves as well, right? Because you can hold sacred space for yourself. You don't have to do it in a group. You can do it solo on your own when you meditate, when you go for a long run, all the different ways we've talked about in this series. So what is the mythopoetic alchemy that breaks the stalemate? Okay. And the way I read this is they run away from the army. They hide in the cornfield. And then they stay there. They stay there. And so, I'm reading this into it because I know this pattern from other stories and mythic traditions. It comes up again and again. But to give the sort of overall pattern, it is that the trick, the thing that you are supposed to do when you are in stalemate, as the story illustrates so beautiful, is to hold space for the stalemate. The irresistible force impacting against the immovable object, they impact, your entire life is frozen, you're like a deer in the headlights, you're like, I can't leave my entire, dynasty, continuing of the family dynasty of like famous, prestigious physicians. There's no part of the equation which will allow me to do that. I will not allow me to do that. And yet, I can't live another day without being a full painter, artist, which is what I really am. It is complete stalemate. And what you do in that situation is you don't run away from it and just numb and, try to sort of distract yourself, okay? And you don't go in and force a brute force solution where you say, all right, well, it's got to be one or the other. So let's just flip a coin and then brute force continue as a physician, or brute force, pull the pin on the grenade, throw it, and just go run off and join the circus and be a painter. So you don't brute force it and you don't run away, you stay. And, my practice is called preside, right? And one of the reasons we call it preside is that presiding is a form of holding space. So what you do is you hold space for the stalemate. You sit there, just like when we talk about grieving. You don't try to ease the pain. You don't try to fix it. There's nothing to fix. The loss is lost, right? Whatever sort of you lost is gone. It's not coming back. So you don't run away and numb. You don't come in and try and say, oh, but the silver lining is, you don't do any of that. You just sit there with the pain and you let it burn you. You let it cook you in pressure and containment. You get into the cooking pot and you just sit there until it melts you into nothing. Right? Like when we teach meditation, right? So when we have our meditations on Insight Timer and people are engaged more with the meditation side of what I do. The very first exercise that for those of you who are familiar with it, right, is the sponge exercise, right? And what that is, right, is a quick 5-minute guided sort of demo of what it feels like to preside, what it feels like to hold space. Because there's this like chattering mind that you've like kind of cleaned and calmed a little bit. You put it there on the table and you preside it over. And the exact instruction in that guided meditation is don't touch it, but also don't walk away from it. Just stay there and just preside over it. Whatever it needs to do, let it do. If it's chattering, if it's worrying about, you're going to get a ticket because your parking meter ran out, you just let it do whatever it does. You don't go in and interfere and you don't walk away. You hold space for it, which is exactly what we're doing here when we talk about the 4 principles and we enter into sacred space, right? This is why we don't fear, threaten, and control each other. We are holding space for each other. Okay. It's uncomfortable. It's scary, but you hold space anyway. In meditation, you hold space. In healing, you hold space for your wound. In following bliss, you hold space for the things you love to do for no good reason, and you don't judge them and you just hold space for them. Okay. And so in stalemate, the trick, the crux is also to hold space. Okay. Because what happens with the soldiers is they don't run back out and surrender themselves and throw themselves down at the mercy of the general to not shoot them. And they don't run out the other side and try to escape anyway. Right? They don't brute force it. They don't come out guns blazing and say, well, at least we'll go down in a blaze of glory. Okay, they stay there in the stalemate, holding space in the cornfield. And then what happens, mythopoetically and in real life, is that out of the two completely irreconcilable things, if you hold space for it and let the pressure and containment work, a third thing arises spontaneously as a result of the held space. Right? And when you hold that space, the dragon shows up freaking out of nowhere. It's like, I thought this was a story about like regular life, and I didn't know this was a magical realism kind of story where there are dragons in the universe, right? I thought it was just soldiers, cornfields, and not getting enough pay. All of a sudden, this dragon shows up. Where the heck did this dragon come from? It came from the fact that they held space and they just sat in the cornfield, starving and not going in either direction. Okay. That is the trick. That is the trick. So let's see what happens then. Let's see what happens. So the dragon shows up and says, you know, have I got a deal for you? They get the 7-year contract. You have to come with me. You have to go through the period of ripening, 7 years. And for those of you who do healing stuff or other fairy tale stuff, this dragon is like a frog, right? This is like a lost board member from healing, and bringing back this exiled part of you to solve it. So in the, say, the Frog King Grimm Brothers story, Grimm Brothers #1, right? The one we told, I think, right at the beginning of the series. The popular name for it is The Princess and the Frog. Right? The frog shows up and says, I can find you your lost self, which is this gold, your lost superpower, which is this golden ball that has fallen in the well. She makes a deal with him. He brings back the golden ball, and then she reneges on the deal and runs off. Right? Now, mythopoetically, the princess is a symbol of a part of you. The frog is a symbol of a part of you. And the ball is a symbol of a part of you. Okay. And so there's always this frog, dragon, devil part of you that comes up, makes a deal with you, and he deals with you in good faith. And as we've said time and again in the series, the #1 rule of fairy tales is to deal with these parts of you in good faith. Do not cheat them. Do not cheat them. Okay. And so the dragon is, I mean, what is a frog but a little dragon, right? So the dragon shows up, makes his deal to allow them to get their golden ball back, which is to escape all this. And the soldiers, interestingly enough, also do not cheat the dragon. Right? They deal with the dragon in good faith. They solve the riddle, right? And there's nothing in the contract that says you can't talk to my grandmother. It's like, I don't even know that you know my grandmother, so I don't even put that in the clause, right? And they don't bargain and beg the dragon to release them. They deal with the dragon in good faith, and then this other door opens, right? And so what's interesting is that there are 2 levels to the holding space for stalemate. Okay. And this is where it gets really interesting. You don't get this in Neverwash or The Devil's City Brother. There it's a straight, you do the deal, you act in good faith, you go down in grief for 7 years, then you come up and you get all this gold, and you know, you sort of inherit the kingdom basically because of the grieving you've done. Here it's a little different, right? Which is so interesting because there's 2 levels of holding space. The first level is where they say, we can't stay in the army, we have to leave, but we're stuck in the cornfield. If we leave, the army will come and get us. And they hold space for that, and then the dragon appears. Okay. So that's great. They get 7 years of the magic whip, you know, money, happiness, you know, all this sort of pleasure. But they know the next deadline is coming. Okay, the next deadline is coming. And the next deadline is that the dragon is coming with this absolutely unsolvable riddle. Okay. And here again, they hold space for this. And it's the third brother. And we'll talk about what the third brother means. The third soldier who holds space. And because he holds space, they're not running away from the dragon. They're not getting ready to like ambush and kill the dragon. Right? And they're not running forward begging the dragon for mercy. Right? Literally in the conversation they have, it's the third brother that says, well, I mean, you guys, we should already be dead. Right? It's like we should have died in the cornfield, but we didn't. And so yet here we are. Right? So we already had one miracle happen. Let's just sit here, hold space for this. And that's when the Baba Yaga old woman, who is basically the agent, the sort of reflection of the dragon grandmother, because they hold space a second time at the next level, right? For this intractable, irreconcilable stalemate. Right? We're like careening toward the cliff and we're going to go down. And by the way, we know from the other stories that if you go down into the underground with the dragon, we know what that's like. That's 7 years of grief, and then you come up and you're fine. Right? So even going down with the dragon is not the end of the world. The dragon's not going to kill them. The dragon says to his grandmother, you know, I'm in the business of conquering souls. And what that means is I take you, I bring you down, I put you in the cooking pot and transform you, and then release the butterfly in the end. That's the dragon's job. That's the dragon's job. So even if they went along with the dragon, it would be okay. But they're afraid, as we naturally fear the dragon. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the second level, they are able to hold space for the stalemate yet again. And what happens? Another dragon shows up. But like, not the mother of the dragon, but the grandmother of the dragon, and not the masculine dragon, the one of the side of manifestation and force and boundary control, but the feminine authority superpower of the dragon. And the feminine, as you know from listening to the series, is the feminine within us, right? Is the holder of nurturing, yes, but also of vision. Right? It's almost like this feeling of the first time in the cornfield when you held space and the dragon showed up. That could have been a fluke. That could have been a fluke. So let's bring you around 7 years before we even send you down. We'll just bring you around 7 years, have your fun, do all the distracting numbing you want, because we want to see if you really get it. And the second time around, we put you in another stalemate. And lo and behold, you do the same thing. You hold space for the stalemate again. It's not a fluke. It's not a fluke. And that's why you get to see the grandmother dragon. This power of holding space for two irreconcilable opposites in our brainstorm, in our brainstorm with Gary and myself. One of the images that came to me was the image of the Bhagavad Gita itself. Right, this is the sort of part of Hindu scripture, and I've spoken about the Gita in other places, but just to really quickly, I'll get to the part which is relevant to like holding space for stalemate, which is at the meta level. The entire Gita itself happens in the tension of the stalemate but in between the two warring armies. Right before the war horn blows, in that tension, the two armies are lined up against each other in the field of battle. And just with the starting gun, they're going to start. And basically, it was this like holocaust of a battle. Basically, the entire aristocratic sort of layer of Indian royalty was like wiped out in this battle between two related families, right? Cousins, uncles, brothers. So right before this happens, Arjuna, the leader of one side, asks his charioteer who is unbeknownst to him, the god Krishna. Arjuna says, not let's get on with it, let's just, let's lock and load and go. He says, drive me out into the middle of the battlefield between the two sides. I want to look at both sides from the middle. From the middle. And the other side just watching him. I mean, they could peg him with an arrow at any point, but they're all just like watching and waiting. They're holding space for him too in this moment. And Krishna drives Arjuna out to the middle of the two lines of battle. And as you know, those of you who know the Gita, he looks out over the opposing line and he sees uncles, brothers, cousins, right? Because they're all related. And he just gets heartsick with what he has to do out of honor. And he sits down, he drops his bow, which is like a no-no. He drops his bow, he sits down, and he says, better that I should die, right? Than to trigger all of this death of my loved ones and family and kinsmen. And so the entire ambrosia of the Gita, right, that has blessed us as this gift to humanity from Indian scripture, flows out of the tension of the held space of this stalemate. Right? It is Arjuna who holds space for the stalemate. This is the scene in the cornfield, right, where you can't go forward, you can't retreat. You'd spontaneously burn up from shame and dishonor. And you can't move forward through all your kinsmen. And instead of saying, just screw it, let's do it anyway, Arjuna rides out to the middle and holds space for the entire conflict. And Krishna, right off the bat, is like, from whence this ignoble cowardice? Get up, pick up your bow, be a man, what are you doing? Do your duty. And even to the deity, he doesn't know he's Krishna, but even to the deity, Arjuna says, no, I will not fight. I will not fight. And he holds space for the stalemate. And because of this, Krishna's like, oh, for Pete's sake, what do I do here? And he starts basically explaining the whole situation to Arjuna, which is then written down. And it is the Bhagavad Gita, right? All those sessions we did before on the 4 yogas, right? Raja, Bhakti, Karma, and Jnana Yoga. The concept of that talk around the 4 yogas came from the Gita, right? Came from the Gita. So the fruit of the universe, right, comes from the held space for what seems like a stalemate. In this story, they held space and the dragon showed up, and then the grandmother showed up at the next level. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna holds space, and the Gita scripture itself is the dragon is the Gita scripture that comes out. So in a way, you could say that when you do have a stalemate in your life, when you really sort of think about this pattern, if you subscribe to it, if you're like, oh yeah, this actually resonates, I can see how this has happened in my own life. Going forward, when you do have the occasion where you feel like you're in complete stalemate, right? Given the pattern of these stories, you know one thing. When you're in stalemate, it's time to get excited. Because if you hold space and allow yourself to be cooked by the discomfort of the stalemate, without forcing forward and without forcing back, and without numbing, you stay lucid and with it, right? You know something interesting is going to happen. You know this power of the third thing will be unleashed from the held space of your nurturing. Okay. So this pattern of unleashing the third power, the first 2 soldiers, as they approach the 7-year cycle, the first 2 soldiers are afraid. Typically in these fairy tales, there's 3 siblings. There's Cinderella and the 2 evil stepsisters. There's Snow White and sort of there's a 3 in that as well, but it doesn't show up in the form of siblings. In a number of these stories, right, there's a pattern of 3s, as we've seen in our past fairy tales. But here, typically what happens is the first 2 siblings, when you zoom into detail, are often, the sort of forces, roughly speaking, of desire and fear, or just overall fear, threat, and control. Okay, the profane forces. And then the third brother, the third sister, the third sibling is the one that sort of pierces through the middle of fear and desire. It's like Buddha, like taking the middle way between desire and fear. And so it's the third soldier that says, all right, look, fellas, we've already been through this once. We should already be dead, or at least starving, wasting away in a cornfield. And yet here we are. And here we are living it up, right? And so even despite all this, you still don't like our chances going forward, right? I mean, what's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen, but I didn't know in the cornfield either, right? And we held space. I mean, you wouldn't use those words. We held space and something showed up. So it's always the third brother who lets go of the clenching and fear, right? The clenching of fear and the clenching of desire. And then he saves the day. Okay. How does he save the day? How does he hold space? He is the hero that pauses, like Arjuna, and allows things to unfold, even though it seems like an intractable stalemate. Okay. And in this case, what happens? The inner feminine, right, the old woman, shows up out of nowhere and basically lays out the path for them in crayon. It's like, you do this, then you do this, then you do this. Even so, the 2 other brothers, the 2 other soldiers, do not, as Christ said, do not have eyes to see, do not have ears to hear. And they're like, scramble, lady, what, thanks for like telling us what to do, but we don't see how that's going to help us, right? And it's the third brother that lets go of fear and desire and says, immediately, out of instinct, for no good reason, it's like, yeah, that's what we're going to do. You guys stay here, I'll go. So he follows the direction and finds the wise woman, right? And he finds the grandmother of the dragon. Now, mind you, specifically in the story, right, this is not presented as cheating. He's still acting in good faith to the dragon, because the dragon is giving him this out of the riddle, even though it's an unsolvable riddle. Seemingly another stalemate. And if anything, because he surrenders to this and holds space for the stalemate, he gets access to the next level dragon, which is the grandmother dragon. Okay. This is the golden insight of the behavior of this third soldier. From a couple stories ago, this is the golden apple of nourishing wisdom that gives insight, right? That the soldier is giving to us through this story. And if we take a bite of this golden apple, right, this nourishing wisdom that gives insight is the thing that makes the gods gods, right? Because they're immortal. They like transcend these cycles, or they go through them, but they know they're going through them and everything turns out okay. Okay. So he does it the second time, and he accesses an even higher power on the feminine side. Right? This is like the big boss of the big boss of the big boss in a video game. First time could have been an accident, a fluke. So we test you. Second time, wow, you really got it. And because you really did it and held space for yet another seeming stalemate, the velvet rope lifts and you get to access the grandmother. What does this superpower inner feminine force do or want? And this is what is so moving and poignant for me about the physics of this story. This is everything we talked about over the past year or two, right? All coming into distillation in the story. We are in the realm of the sacred now. You have surrendered fully twice to the seeming intractable stalemate of the world of the profane, of fear, threat, and control. Right? Where I can't leave my prestigious physician role, fear, threat, and control. I can't stay there either, right? Because I need to go be what I actually am, but I'm afraid of doing that. So full on fear, threat, and control, complete stalemate, and you just hold space for it. When you hold space for it, you enter into the sacred zone where it is just very simply a space devoid of fear, threat, and control. I'm not going to be afraid of either side. I'm just going to sit there, and it's painful, and I'm not going to be afraid of the pain. And it's uncertain, and I'm not going to be afraid of the uncertainty. I'm just going to sit there and hold space for this. So when you're fully in that sacred mode, you reach the highest power within you with just this grandmother dragon who could like take you and just flick you into the stove. I mean, you're like an hors d'oeuvre to her, right? She can just eat you, right? And she doesn't answer to anyone. She is the unconquerable, okay? But she helps you anyway, right? And the telltale signs where you know you're in the realm of the sacred in this point of the story is that she helps you not for an exchange. The lower level dragon, her grandson, says, I'll help you if you sign your name and come with me down into healing, because that's what you need to do, right? Chuckleheads, right? This is because I'm a part of you, right? The dragon is like your liver, right? The grandmother is like your third eye for full vision, right? These are all parts of you. So the dragon is trying to get you down into healing. But it's still in this realm of like fear, threat, and control, of exchange, of transaction. But with the grandmother, we know we're full on sacred because she helps you for nothing in exchange. She doesn't ask for anything in return. What could you give her that she could use anyway? Right? As the story says, she helped him just because she liked him. She liked this young man, this little human. In other words, when we talk about the difference between need, want, and desire, right? And desire being the thing you will towards for no good reason, right? Need is like, I need this stuff, otherwise I'm going to die. Want is, I want this stuff. If I don't do it, I'll hurt. I'll feel humiliated. I'll feel loss of prestige. I won't have security. Nobody will love me. So the things you want to do, the litmus test, the Gowrie test, as I call it, is if you don't do them, they hurt. And that's how you know they relate to your wounds. But then the third level, the level of desire, are the things you want and love and want to do in your life for no good reason. Like the physician doing the physician stuff out of want and need. But the painter stuff is out of desire for no good reason. Okay. And that's where your love, that's where your bliss is. Bliss is the thing you do for no good reason, and also the thing that makes you unique in the world. Right? There are a million different ways to make money and prestige and to put food on the table. So you know you're in the sacred because she does not exchange with you. She doesn't even need your good faith or whatever. She helps you for no exchange. In other words, she helps you for no good reason. She helps you at the level of desire, not need or want, out of sacred, not profane. She helps you out of love, not fear. Okay. This is the ultimate realization of the grandiosity of all of life in the universe. Right? So when you think about the fact that we're even alive as human beings on this earth, right? There's billions and billions of galaxies out there. We haven't found life on any of them yet. And so we say, well, given that, what are the chances of us even being here on the planet? Right? It's like, we shouldn't even be here. Right? The chances scientifically, right, in the Cartesian world, not the mythopoeic world, but in the Cartesian scientific, hard, concrete reality, facts, numbers, and provable evidence. From that world, we should not exist. Right? The chances of our existing in this multi-billion galaxy universe are basically zero. And yet, here we are for no good reason. And the question of life is, how will you react to that? right? Will you be like the first two soldiers where it's like, yeah, I don't know, I'm really worried about the future, I don't know what's going to happen? Or are you going to be like the third soldier? And there's no good reason. We're both. We're both. There's a part of me that's like the fearful soldiers, and there's a part of me that's like the third soldier. So it's not saying you better be like one or the other, but it's like we're both. But to know that we're both. So there's a side of us that's like, oh, I don't know, I'm worried about this dragon coming back. And there's another side of us going like, we should be dead in the cornfield already. And yet here we are. Right? I don't know what's going to happen, but we're already way ahead. There's billions of galaxies that don't have life, and we shouldn't exist, and yet here we are. And given that state of affairs, you still say things like, oh, we're just these little ants, microbes on this little rock, insignificant speck in the universe. We're nothing, we don't matter, or whatever. And it's like, you can do that. You can do that. Or you could be like, given all that, why are we even here? Why are we here? Right? Is it a rounding error? Is it a mistake? Or is it the utter sort of ultimate grandiosity that out of billions of universes, we are here? It's like, I don't know if this is kind of an old movie from like the mid-90s, but this movie Pulp Fiction, right? Where there's Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta and they're gangsters. And there's a scene in the beginning where basically this guy comes out of the bathroom and unloads his entire gun, shooting them at point blank range. And all the bullets miss them. Right? And the question basically is, how do you view that? Are you like John Travolta, who later in the diner says that was just a freak occurrence? Or are you like Samuel L. Jackson, looking at the exact same thing, having lived through the exact same thing, and said, no, that was a miracle? Right? And he literally says, we should be dead, and we're not. And I'm going to change my life. And John Travolta's like, are you kidding? You're just going to be a bum? You're not going to be a gangster anymore? And Samuel L. Jackson says, yeah, because it doesn't matter what happened. He could have turned Coke to Pepsi, found my car keys. The actual thing that happened doesn't matter. The difference is that I felt the touch of God. Right? So the reason I get excited when you have the stalemate in life is that we know the formula of what to do right from the story. So there's a stalemate. I'm stuck. Irresistible force meeting an immovable object within me. Hold space for it. Hold space for it. The dragon will show up. Do what the dragon says. And when it happens again, after 7 years, when you should have forgotten everything, right? You will have another stalemate. Do the same thing. Do the same thing. I mean, we shouldn't be here anyway, right? None of us should be here anyway. And so when he holds space at this level, the third soldier, he reaches the level of Baba Yaga, the scariest of the scary. Even the dragon is scared of his grandmother, right? And the soldier tells the story to the ultimate sacred feminine. And she helps you for no good reason. And what's really even more fascinating, this additional detail is, this highest level of the feminine, she doesn't help you by intervening. It's not an act of God where she comes in and commands her grandson, hey, I like this kid, back off, let him go rub off the signatures. It's not a deus ex machina kind of like God just comes down and like stops it, right? It's a really fascinating detail that she doesn't do it like that, but she gives her blessing through revelation, through vision, through insight. Right? At the ultimate sacred, right? When they save your behind, they don't do it through intervention. They do it through revelation. Right? She reveals what's going on in the dragon's mind. Right? And she does it and takes care of you for no good reason. There's no bargain. You don't owe anything to the dragon goddess at the end. There's nothing you can give her. There's nothing she needs from you. Right? She does it out of pure love and delight and desire. Okay, so those are the notes I had for the story. Gary, you still there?
Hey, Artie, I'm here.
Hey.
Hi.
What else? What else?
I mean, it's just fascinating to me that throughout the sacred space sessions that we've been doing, we call this sacred space and we say we'll hold space for everything. And we've done sessions in the past where we talk about, the power of holding space in transformation, to help transformation, right? We talk about holding space for grief, and the role of grief itself in transformation. We've done all of that, and as we've moved through, I feel like we've covered different levels of holding space in this labyrinthine circumambulatory way, where at one level, the thing about holding space is that it allows transformation to happen. And the thing about holding space is that you then allow the cooking pot to, enough fire to cook whatever it needs to cook. So then you allow for the grief. And sometimes we say, like in this session, we hold space because that's how the insight comes in. And that insight gives us nourishment. So we hold space for that nourishment to come, which we don't really get elsewhere. And now we've come to a point where we're saying, hold space for no good reason. Hold space because you hold space. That's what you do. And wait for the magic. So wait for it. It's coming. But then, if you anticipate it won't come because, that's how the magic works. You just hold space and it will turn up. So I feel like, as you're spiraling in this labyrinthine path of holding space and learning to hold space, you're just moving towards, more and more magical things, inexplicable things where you can't even give the rationale of why this happens. You could say, oh, you hold space and you let grief distill, and then that becomes the juice of the stew, which then, moves into your transformatory thing. See, when you say those things, it's like there is a flow to it, there is a logic to it, there's a rationale to it. But now we've come to a point where, hold space and who knows what happens, right? It's completely random. But it's magical, right? So I love that we've come to this phase. I was just observing that. I was thinking we've come this far in live sacred space, and these are the things we've covered just about holding space.
Yeah. So I love all that. The one thing that comes to me that I would like to say is that I wouldn't say it's random. I wouldn't. I mean, it seems random.
It seems random.
The word perhaps is like it appears paradoxical to you or to me when I'm in the middle of it. And there's almost this trick of like, so we talk about this distinction between paradox and malice, right?
Yeah.
So it's like when something befalls me and it's like, oh, my like catalytic converter out of my car got stolen and like, oh my gosh, I'm delayed for like all this time and what am I going to do? There's two ways to look at that, right? One is to say you view it through the lens of malice, where it's like, oh, the gods are punishing me or I'm an idiot and this is a punishment, right? And you could say that. There's nothing wrong with that. But you can use a different lens to say it's a paradox. So it's not that everything happens for a reason, this is a sign or whatever, but it's more just to have this. So when you look through the lens of paradox, it doesn't mean you know what it means.
Yeah.
It means you don't know. And yet you approach it with curiosity. Paradox is a form of holding space. Yeah. Malice is good and bad, and I'm on the bad, or wrongly so, and I'm going to rail against the gods for my outrageous fortune. Right? Everything's known there. Whereas with paradox, it's like, I don't know why my car got broken into. I mean, yeah, I'll fix it and it'll cost money or whatever. But it's like, I'm more like in a state of wonder and curiosity about like, what is the deeper pattern going on here? If there is, maybe there isn't. Maybe it is random. Right? But the point is, I don't know. Right? You can brute force and say, well, it's just random. It's crime is going up. It's a pandemic. Or you could say, I know for sure. And it's angels. And it's like this meaning and all this other stuff. I read it as a sign. When the reality is, I don't know. And you hold space for that. It's kind of like a mini stalemate, right? That you allow to happen. And in paradox, in the sacred, you don't control it. You just allow yourself to not know. And then something else kind of comes out from that. I mean, all these things, punishment versus transformation, malice versus paradox, all these sort of this versus that sort of principles that we teach in general, but that have come out in sacred space, are all different angles of like kind of like getting you back into the sacred, where you release control, not because we tell you to, but it's like, yeah, there's a lens where you have control, which is like malice and the world is unfair. And we're not saying that's invalid. We're just saying that's one of at least two possibilities. And you can choose. Right from the beginning, we're like, there's profane and there's sacred. Most people are 99% profane, 1% sacred. We're not saying you should have a different mix. We're just, describing a state of affairs that is so, and we're like, because we try to stay in the sacred too, so we don't tell you what to do, but we're like, you do have choice. You do have a choice. If you want it, only if you want, right? No expectation of participation, which is like one of the 4 principles. You can try it and taste it. And then if you're like, this is awful, this sacred space is awful. I like my life 99% profane, 1% sacred. Then it's like, carry on, no action needed, right? Carry on, no change needed, because you are the sovereign of your life. Yeah. The other thing that came to me while you were talking was that it's one thing to say, hold space. It's an entirely another thing to actually do it.
Yeah.
And one of the sort of deeper realizations I've had in the last few months is that, like, I started my stuff teaching meditation probably like 10 years ago, just following the muse or whatever. And as I've done more work in healing and bliss, I'm like, well, I don't know if so we recently have been putting my meditations up on Insight Timer. And I'm like, there's so many meditations here. Do I even need to be here? What's the point? And what I realized is that the more I talk about holding space with my advisees and all the healing work we do, after a while, it's like you read all these dreams, you do all these things, you get all this direction. But the actual act of holding space takes musculature.
Yes.
Right? If I'm like, yeah, you just walk over there, it's about 3 miles away and everything's free, you just take what you want and come back. You still have to walk the 3 miles. Right? And if the 3 miles is like a 5 or 10 minute meditation, and you can't do that yet, then it's like, when you meditate, you are holding space. Your mind is like scratching at your face, right? Like an animal you're stuck in a phone booth with, right? And metaphorically, it's like you hold space for it. You just let it go. And you hold space for it. And then eventually the third thing happens, and then it calms down, and then it transforms into something else. Even if you've done that several times, it's still, if you don't practice it, your muscles get like rusty. Yeah. You may know how to kick a perfect soccer ball, pass across the field, right? Because you did it when you were younger. But it's like, if you let a few years go, you get on the field, like your body is not there anymore. It's like, I can picture myself doing it in my mind perfectly, but it's like, the muscles need to be there. So yeah, that's why it's like, for me, like meditation and teaching meditation is slowly coming back and reintegrating into like everything else we're teaching, as it's like, it's just a useful skill, a Swiss Army knife to have in your back pocket as you're going through all of these circumambulations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, also when we say hold space, it's kind of easy to do that when you're feeling good, or you're feeling okay through the day, and there's not really much to worry about. But when you're really going through grief, or intense kind of emotional stress, and to hold space, to even know what it's like to hold space for that, you just, like you said, you need practice. I guess that's why meditation is called a meditation practice. When you do that every day, you're really just kind of building that muscle that allows you to kind of get into that state even on one of the bad days, right? You're not really
Right.
at your best. Yeah,
you have that reflex. So when you fall, your like arms naturally will just like go out and catch you.
right.
Go into that meditative kind of, that center of the wheel feeling that we always talk about.
Yeah.
So there is this question here. Sorry, go ahead.
I was coming to that. I was just going to say that there's this question. There's a wonderful question, because I was just so, for me, with the story, I was so fascinated by the dragon's grandmother, right? I didn't think of the riddle itself, but I was like, no, the grandmother is absolutely lovely. I'm going to just stick around with her for a while. So we didn't get to actually discuss the riddle itself and the symbolism of the riddle. So the question that says here is, so what is this completely arbitrary and sort of random riddle, and what does it mean? So would you like?
I love this. So thank you for bringing that up. So for me, again, it's completely arbitrary, it's completely random, or it may be paradoxical, right? So it may have a meaning that we don't fully understand yet. And so for me, I don't know the answer. I haven't spent, I have a hunch, right? But to give the honest answer is that I don't know the answer. And typically, let's say a riddle like this or a story like this, it's a story that like a person, a healer, teacher, writer, whatever, may come across and may sit with on and off for years. We may do this and work with just this riddle in like a 3-day workshop or something, right? or just this fairy tale. We don't really do retreats like that right now. It hasn't like come to me in that form, but there are other people who like, will do like 3 or 4 years of a regular workshop series, and they'll use like basically 3, 2 or 3 fairy tales, and that will be like their toolbox, right? To like bring all the stuff out. And that's fabulous. So I guess what I'm saying is you can chew on these fairy tales endlessly, and they will continue to give gifts. Now, the way we happen to do it in Live Sacred Space is like every session, every week, every month, it's like a new story, because your muse kind of brings these out, and this is how we do them. But all of the stories that you have led us to touch on could be these deep dives in and of themselves in the form of like a book or workshops or other things like that. So I say all that just to give respect to the story and the fairy tale, because I never want to be in this position where it's like, well, it just means this and that's it, close it off and stick it in a drawer and move on, right? That's almost like the certain way of guaranteeing it will come back and bite you in the behind later. So for me, my current hunch on the dragon's riddle is that because we know from the other stories where the dragon will take you at the end of 7 years.
Yes. Yeah.
You will go down below into grief. You will perhaps sit at a feasting table where everything turns to ash in your mouth. You will perhaps be boiling pots, right? Where your wounds are being cooked over a 7-year period. There are all these different, never wash. You will go down and you will not be allowed to wash. You will do these things and serve all these different versions, which basically have this similar kind of flavor to them. And the thing that hit me about the riddle was that I'm the dragon. I am a part of you. It is my job to make sure by hook or by crook, because you're always going to run. right? Because you're terrified of going down below. You're terrified of looking within. You're terrified of, even reflecting on your like childhood wounds and all these traumas that you, and that's all reasonable. But I'm the dragon. My job is to bring you down, to digest and transform all of that so that you can reach your butterfly phase. Because if you don't reach your butterfly phase, that's on me. That's on all of us. It's our job to keep you in these cycles, right? It's like if you're a living thing, you continue growing. So that's what I'm going to do. Once we get down below into the feasting area, there's a certain way things go down there. There's certain kinds of meat. There's certain kinds of utensils. There's certain kinds of cups to drink from. And you're out. Because I've given you your 7 years of plenty. Like, I don't need to give you any out.
Right.
You owe me for that. I can just make you whatever, like paint my kitchen or be my butler or whatever for 7 years. Right? But that's not what we're talking about here. The dragon is a part of you. The dragon is fulfilling a function, just like the liver is fulfilling a function when it purifies your blood. And so the only out for the dragon is if you can describe to me what the feast meal is like down there, what we eat, what utensils we use, and prove to me that you know what it is like to grieve, then you don't need to go down because you've clearly already been down there. That's how I read that riddle. And the fact that this higher Baba Yaga dragoness, she doesn't give you the answers. Okay. Because what's interesting as a detail is she presumably doesn't even know the answers because she doesn't even know what his riddle is. She gives you insight into what will happen down there. And that allows you to push it off further. Okay. Now, none of these fairy tales are the end of the story. We could roll into the next one and the next one because it's a cycle. It's a cycle. Okay. And so the feeling I have from this is that we got out of this going down. Okay. But what happens at the end of this? Is this like the Devil's Bridge where we outsmarted the devil? Hooray! And we don't have to we can actually cheat him and abuse him and go off and continue living, our sort of glorious life above ground in the solar like love and light and never go down into the darkness. Right? Is it like that? I mean, it could be. But given these soldiers, right, they're not afraid to hold space. Right? And the dragon grandmother, likes this guy. So what I imagine in my own mythopoetic sort of reading of this is that, yeah, so they got out of this particular round of it, so that's good. But if I'm the third soldier, I go back to the dragon grandmother just to say hi. Not because that's the realm of the sacred. I don't go back to her because I have another problem. I go back to her for no good reason. Because I like, as like one of the reverends in Memorial Church, I remember all of this when I was back at Harvard as a student. There was this one sermon he gave where he like gave all this sort of, fire, not fire and brimstone, but he was like on a roll. And at one point he was like, why do we choose to do things to be, closer to the divine, right? Is it because we fear fire and brimstone? Because we fear like what our friends will think? Because we fear going to hell and suffering? It's like, no, that's all sort of kindergarten stuff. The real reason, right, we have an impulse toward the divine, I'm paraphrasing now, is because, and he's a Christian preacher, so he's using his vocabulary. He says the real reason we have an impulse toward the divine is because it is good to be close to God. Right? When you're close to the muse and following her direction, when you're close to the grandmother dragon, it's not that you're staying out of trouble. It's like you like being next to grandma. It's just good. It's not really the cookies you get or the little sort of spoonfuls of soup out of the stove, or the lollipops or the candies or the pats on the head. It is those things, but it's not any. If I went someplace else and got like a candy, it wouldn't be the same, right? It's the overall flow of being close to that inner part of you, that visionary part of you. Whether it gives you an interesting, usable, profitable insight today or not, you don't care. That's not why I'm here. When you're in the sacred, you're there because it is just good to be in the sacred. It is just good to be in the sacred. And so, so yeah, even though they get out of this, it's almost like she helps them get out of it just to set the connection between you and the deeper sacred. And then you go back and say, well, I don't have to, but can I go down with the dragon anyway and just hang out? And the dragon's there. It's like, wait, you want to come down? It's like, well, I mean, I'm buddies with your grandmother, right? What are you going to do to me? I'm not afraid of you anymore, right? I'm not going to mess with you. I'm not going to like put a harness on you and like sell tickets to show you off at the circus, right? I'm certainly not going to do that. But it's like, where were you going to take us? Like, we'll go. Why not? You know, we'll come with you. I mean, it's like you're talking to your liver and your liver's like, stop doing this, stop doing that. And after a while, it's like you take a pill to shut the liver up. But after a while, it's like, well, I mean, if you really want me to drink less, it's like, I guess I could do that. You know, and the liver, without threatening you, is like, I mean, yeah, that would be good. Let's just try it. Let's try it. See how you feel. Right. And you start doing things not because they're good for you, but out of curiosity, right? Out of wonder, not under fear or threat. But I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
It definitely seemed like, you had this whole flavor of the dragon giving them a chance. I mean, the dragon does, you guessed the riddle, I'll let you go. I mean, it didn't have to say that. I've already done a favor, so you owe this to me. So you have to come to me with no conditions.
Right.
But then it still gives the key and says, if you guess the riddle, you can go. And the riddle is, it was, like you said, very reminiscent of figuring out what kind of nourishment you will get once you're with me.
Right.
And that nourishment, the food, the wine glass, and this.
And after you're free to go, you're like, well, what is the deal with that roasted meat? You know, can we go down and try that?
Yeah.
And then there's another deal that you may cut with the dragon, right?
Yeah, and it's
but
like,
it's like you willingly go. It's like that's going down into grief willingly. It's like, okay, I'm sick of running.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sick of trying to cover. I'm like, it's like if I've had this loss, it's like this dream I had that is, or this loss of a loved one,
Yeah.
It's like after a decade of like drinking myself into a stupor or like running away and distracting myself with like, work and everything. After a while, I'm just like, that 10 years of running away, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm just go back. I will sit in the hole and I will feel the pain because I don't want to run anymore. Like sitting with the pain stops after a while on its own.
Right.
Running is like forever, but it takes you a couple decades of running to realize it's like, I kind of don't want to do wait, can we roll? What was the alternative again? And I was like, the alternative is you climb down into the hole and you sit with the pain, and the pain burns and hurts like hell, and you don't run away and you don't stuff it down. You sit there. It's like a meditation. You just sit there and you preside over it. You hold space over your chattering mind in meditation, but then very painful things will come up. If you meditate, if you get out to like the 1 or 2 hour milestone, right? Even more painful things from your past will start to come up in meditation. It takes musculature to sit with those scary things that come up.
Right.
But after you sit with them and they flow through you, I won't say you're done in the sense that you will not care that you have that loss.
Mm-hmm.
But you will be done from the sense of you will not be afraid of going down anymore.
Right.
That's the magic of this riddle, where it's like you start to get the glimmer of like going down with the dragon is not terrifying anymore. But you start to have curiosity, and then eventually you willingly go down.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the trick to everything. In The Devil's Sooty Brother, he comes up the first time, he gets cheated, And immediately, this is why I love that story so much as a parable, as a mythopoetic pattern of grief.
Yeah.
As soon as he gets cheated because he showed his gold too early, he goes back down to the devil and makes his complaint. And the devil does not make him stay another 7 years. He's like, all right, well, have a seat. We'll take care of you. We'll clean you up. Now, here's what I want you to do. Right? So this underground place of grief and grieving, after you've done the grieving, it's not like you're done, I never have to go back there again. It's like you can go back there every other day.
Yeah.
And when he comes back up, he comes up with a second knapsack of gold.
Right.
It becomes this cornucopia. It becomes the grail.
Yeah.
Right? This place of pain that was your cooking pot becomes the grail that like heals anything else that comes at it and fruits with like endless cornucopia of like everything you desire.
Yeah.
That's how you get over it. The pain doesn't go away, but your fear of it, your relationship to it completely transforms.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Yeah. So do you have a reflection exercise or a question for the month?
Okay, yes. Let's do the exercise. Let's do
right.
the exercise.
Yeah.
Thanks for keeping us on time. Okay, so the exercise for this month, this session, and again, the fourth principle of proceeding in sacred space, no expectation of participation. This is just a suggestion. It's not going to give you a breakthrough, heal you. It's just, you just do it for the heck of it, for fun, for no good reason, and only if you want, okay? And the way you would do this exercise is you would just take 10 minutes of alone time, either at home, or like if you're driving, you're going to like the supermarket, you just park the car. Before you go into the supermarket, you just sit there for 10 minutes in the car alone. And no one will miss you, just 10 minutes. Take out some pen and paper and write your reflections on this exercise. Only if you want. So the exercise we came up with is, what is a stalemate that you are facing in your life now? Between what feels like an irresistible force and an immovable object in your life. In your health, perhaps you have a health issue that feels like it's a complete stalemate. I can't move forward, I can't move back. In your career, you may feel like you're stuck. In your finances, in your relationships with, your partner or your lover, or with your parents, or with your children, or even in your spiritual life. Like, what's my next step of spiritual development? Do I even think about it in those terms anymore? Where you feel you are caught squarely between two absolutely irreconcilable choices, where both choices are absolutely imperative and both absolutely unacceptable. Okay. And so the exercise is, in your notes, is to fully articulate both positions so that on a single piece of paper, you see in full detail just how intractable they are. And then to sit there for 5, 10, however many minutes you have, and hold space for that stalemate. To sit in the cornfield, starving, and you just sit there. You don't run out guns blazing, and you don't run back and throw yourself on the mercy of the court. You just sit there in stalemate, in discomfort, in uncertainty, in ambiguity, at a loss for ego power and nourishment, and you sit there anyway. For as long as it takes, for as long as you can hold it, until perhaps you lose all hope, right? And you still continue to hold space for this, for, like the grandmother, for no good reason. And then you hold that space within you after you get out, after the exercise, and just walk around in the outer world. You don't need to tell anyone. But within your own self, you are holding space for this absolutely intractable thing. You can give yourself a budget. I'll hold space for this for a day, for 2 days. Or you're like, I'm stuck anyway. I'm going to hold space for this for the next 10 years if I have to, because there really is no solution. But I'm not going to run away and numb and distract. Maybe a short break every now and then, right? And I'm not going to go in and, with guns blazing, brute force it in one direction or another. I will hold space for it. Even if I've lost all hope of the third thing springing forth, I'm still going to hold space for it for no good reason. Okay. So that's the exercise to try. Only if you want. Only if you want. All right. So now we will close sacred space. And what I'll do is, let me put the link for the next session, which will be in about a month. And come and join us. Again, only if you want. I'll put that in the Facebook side as well. And then we will go ahead and close sacred space. So our next session is next month. It's free. It's open. Invite others. Spread the link only if you want. And show up and join us again in a month only if you want. All right. So I hereby close the session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and with us. And thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment of the shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, have a great month, and I will see you all in the next session. Happy Sunday, everyone. Thank you.